I've got my kids, both of them, my sweet little angels. Hi, babies. Hi, baby babes. Yeah, me sweet guys. Hey guys, what's up? Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me again today. I thought it would be interesting to talk about the top 5 most terrifying moments I had while I traveled the country over a span of 5 years. I did about 2 years cumulatively on the road. So my first trip was just around 4 months. My second trip was around 3 months. I came back a little early because my dog came down with degenerative myelopathy that I had at the time. And then in 2023, I finally had the opportunity to do this trip all over again. I left in 2022. I quit my job and went to my parents' house for Thanksgiving in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then spent the holidays with them and then started my travels in 2023. So to dive right in, there's so many terrifying moments that can happen when you're out there. And oh man, thinking about some of these moments that I overcame by myself are just, it gives you a lot of confidence that you can handle almost any weird thing that life throws at you. And it let me know that I was capable. Before we dive in too far, thank you guys so much for the compliments on wearing the hats, but this is my dirty hair day do. So this is what I do when I don't feel like washing my hair. Okay, so let's start with the shenanigans from 2019. This was my first trip on the road doing this solo type of travel. I had a senior dog at the time. She was amazing, but she was the reason why I started traveling the way that I did. Part of it, I wanted to spend more time with my dog. I didn't want to travel abroad, and I figured traveling around the country with the camper was the way to give my senior dog like our last couple hurrahs, because we did 2 trips together before we couldn't anymore. But so in 2019, I am starting to wrap up my trip, and I decided to come back through Albuquerque to visit my grandfather and spend Thanksgiving with him because I had never done that before. I never had a Thanksgiving with my grandfather up until that point. And so I was able to cook my first full Thanksgiving dinner. But before that happened, I was coming through Gallup, and I was planning on driving from the Painted Desert to Albuquerque that day. And as I'm coming across the interstate, I look in my rearview mirror and anybody that's ever driven through Gallup knows how bad the road construction is, how bad like some of that stuff, like the potholes and everything. I don't have a rock protector on the camper on the front. So the windshield is very open. And what are we doing, guys? Can I thank you. Can I tell my story? Go on, Floofy Butt. You're so cute. We need lovin's, don't we? Lots and lots of lovin's. Okay. So anyways, I'm driving down the interstate from Gallup to Albuquerque, and I look in my rearview mirror, and there is a tornado happening back there. Like everything is flying around in the camper. It's like a whirlwind, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? And it's like you all of a sudden, like you lose all the color in your body, and you just kind of like are paralyzed for that 1 second of like that paralyzing fear of what is going on. And so I pulled over real quick to try and figure out, okay, what's going on. I got out of the car on the side of the interstate on the shoulder with my lights flashing and everything. I open up the door, and there is safety glass all in the camper. Some of my stuff was sucked out the front windshield. It was one of the little reflective sheets that I had to cover the window. The pressure of the cabin was blowing the door open. I re-secured everything the best I could, drove down the interstate just a little bit further at like 20 to 30 miles an hour with the door just popping open on the camper because that pressure was so bad. It was really scary. I'm not going to lie. I couldn't drive all the way back to Albuquerque with the camper like that. Obviously, I had to figure out how do I fix this, and I'm in the middle of nowhere. And so I stopped at the trucker way station. I call my dad. I'm freaking out. I'm like, I really don't know what to do at this point. So I find a Home Depot and a hardware store because my dad had suggested getting like a board cut the size for the front of the camper and then getting some Gorilla tape. The unfortunate part about this was it was in November, close to Thanksgiving, and it's getting dusky out at this point. So I'm not going to be able to make it to Albuquerque that night. And so I get to the Home Depot, white knuckling it down the interstate to get there. And the bay was full, the bay area with the overhang. And so I go in the store, I get my board cut. I see that there's a storm brewing in the distance. And I'm like, great, it's going to rain tonight. I don't have a front windshield on my camper. And it starts like doing the little mist rain, like the little piss rain is what I call it. So I go into Home Depot. I get what I need to get. I get a board cut. I get some Gorilla Tape. I get out to the camper. I'm able to pull my camper in the bay at this point, and I'm sitting there trying to assess the damage. And I'm like, let me see if I can get this. And so I'm trying to put tape around the camper, and I'm like, this does not seem secure. This is not the most secure thing I've ever done in my life because it's got the little piss rain. It's not sticking. It's cold. And I'm like, this board is not going to stay here with the tape on it. It's going to be sucked right off just like everything else. And so I'm sitting there panicking. There's a guy that walks out of Home Depot. He starts talking to me about the camper, and he's like, is that a U-Haul camper? And I'm like, sir, I really wish I could talk to you right now. I was like, but I am so stressed out. I was like, I have to figure out where I'm going to stay tonight. I can't, my camper just busted the windshield out. I'm, driving across the country by myself. And so he was like, oh, okay, no, I totally understand. And he walked off, and I was just sitting there in panic mode, but trying to like collect myself and get the pieces together. And what can I do to fix this? He comes back about 2 or 3 minutes later, and he goes, I checked with my wife. He's like, I have some tools and I wanted to help you. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, this is great. And I was like, well, this is what I'm trying. It's not worked. And he pulled out his toolkit, and then he said, well, if we can get a couple pieces of scrap wood and like some screws, then we can clamp it together from the inside around the fiberglass frame of the camper. So we basically put the board on the front of the camper and then took some other pieces of wood and screwed them together along the front of the windshield there. And that way it kept it secure. I was able to drive back to my grandfather's the next morning after I stayed in a Cracker Barrel parking lot. Had it not been for that gentleman saving me that afternoon. And, I talk about humanity a lot. There is so much. When somebody's in desperate need, people want to help. That's something I've recognized throughout my life. If you need help and you ask for it, people are 99.9% of the time going to want to give it to you because people want to help other people. It's just in our nature. So that was very affirming to have that help present itself when I needed it the most. And what a cool experience it turned out to be in the middle of trauma and drama. So that was my first time on the road. It was like, what am I going to do? So I was able to stay in a secure camper after I was able to sweep out the glass and get it all cleaned up from all of that, which I still on occasion find security glass in the camper. And I've done a deep clean on it, so I don't think there's any more to find, but I kept that one last little piece that I found the last time, just as a memento. So that was the big scare for 2019, amongst other things, but that was the initial biggest probably scare that I had on my travels in 2019. In 2020, moving on to 2020. 2020 was a weird year. I think we can all agree. That was a very interesting time and space for all of us. And when I started my travels in 2020, I'm not going to spend too much time here, but I almost got abducted by a cult because there were some things coming out that, I was unaware of. And I met someone at a local park traveling with their son, and they were picking up trash around their campsite. We connected, just chatting. And I remember sitting out at the picnic table, drinking some muscadine wine. And all of a sudden, I had this weird thing happen where I looked at this person that I was talking to, and there were like evil entities all around him. And let me tell you, this freaked me out because I've never seen anything like this in my life. It was the only time I've ever had this type of experience. But I suddenly became very irritable, and I could feel it. And I was like, I need to go to bed. I was like, I'm tired. I need to go to bed. So I went to go get in my camper after chatting with this individual for a little bit by the picnic table, and his son had gone to bed, and they were like in a camp spot at a state park right across from me. Anyway, I go to bed, go to get ready, and 10 minutes after I'm in my camper, I get a knock on the door, and I'm like, okay, what's this? Like, I'm kind of ready for this night to be over. That was really weird. It really creeped me out what just happened. And I get a knock on the door. I let this individual, he wants to see the inside of my camper. And I'm like, this is kind of creepy, but his son's in the camper right next to him. I'm at a state park. I'm registered here. So if anything weird happens, like at least they'll know. They'll be able to investigate and figure it out. So I let him in the camper, and he checks it out. I'm sitting on the bed with my dog. This is when I didn't have the bunks converted to bunks yet, and there was still a bench there. He sat on the bench. We chatted for a few minutes. I kind of probably looked pretty irritated. He didn't stay in there very long. He went to go stand up. He paused awkwardly for a second before he went out, and that kind of freaked me out. But anyway, I got him out of my camper, locked the door, and I was like, that was freaking nuts. I should not have let him in my camper at all, because that was not the right thing to do. Anyway, he was married, so I didn't think anything of it. Like, I'm a pretty trusting person until my gut tells me otherwise, and my gut was trying to tell me otherwise. The next morning, I started to slough off those feelings like it was probably the muscadine wine. I don't know. Something was off. He seemed perfectly normal with his son the next morning. And then he was like, well, where are you heading? And I was like, well, I'm going through Colorado, and I, don't know where after that. I'm kind of free flowing right now. And gave him a rundown of where I thought I wanted to go. I wanted to check out Wyoming on this trip, and all sorts of stuff. So we decided to travel together, but separate, obviously. We went through Colorado, and I ended up traveling with him and his son for 2 weeks, and then went up to Glacier, and his wife came to join later. And his wife was on the same page he was, like with the cult-like mentality. And there were things that I would ask questions about, like just ask questions, and then he couldn't provide any evidence of this and just kept saying, do your research. And I was like, if it's there and you have it and you know it, why can't you show me evidence of what you're talking about? So like, I consider myself to be pretty well educated. I have 2 degrees from the University of Tennessee. Book smarts don't compare to street smarts, though. So like, I do have a little bit of both, but I was just like, this is too much. The approach was very subtle, and then it built from there. So I didn't realize how crazy, because I was kind of isolated. I didn't have good connection to internet to be able to check out some of the stuff that he was telling me. And I kept calling my mom, like, Mom, have you heard of this? Have you heard of that? And she was like, oh God, my daughter's about to get abducted, But anyway, long story short, we parted ways in Glacier after his wife came to join. They were going to go on to Mount Rainier, and I decided to take my dog to the vet because she lost the ability to walk with her back legs. It's a paralysis disease that happens sometimes in larger breed dogs. That's what degenerative myelopathy is. It's a very sad situation, but anyway, so I took her to the vet to try and figure out what was happening, if maybe she stepped on something and that's what was causing the loss of the back legs and everything else. But I decided to start to head out to Mount Rainier, and I got to Spokane, and then I was like, I can't do this to my dog. So I decided to abort that trip, bring her home. And when I kept getting messages from the cult member leader that like sending me all these conspiracy theories and everything else with no evidence to back it up, I was just like, dude, I really need to spend some time with my dog. Right now, we're going through a really difficult time. I don't want to focus on this. I want to focus on her. And he basically told me that I needed to toughen up. And that's where I drew the line. I was like, no, this is not how I want to spend the last few days. The last amount of time that I have with my dog is worrying about these other conspiracy theories. Anytime you have to pressure somebody or scare somebody to believe what you believe, it's probably not the right path to be on. I'm just going to say that. Anyway, long story short, when I parted ways and I had to end up blocking this individual, I get a really nasty gram back telling me what a weak and ignorant biatch I was for blocking him. But learned a lot in that instance, and always go with your gut, because my gut told me that first night that there was something off. So I almost got abducted by a cult member in 2020. Monument Valley was also 2020. So after my dog came down with degenerative myelopathy, my grandmother was going to take me to Monument Valley when I was in my 20s. And we were going to go through and visit. My step-grandfather got pretty ill, and we couldn't make the trip with him. So we decided to stay and not go on that trip. So I lost my grandma in 2013, the end of 2013, just before Christmas. And I decided on the way back with my dog in 2020 that I was going to go through Monument Valley since I hadn't been there yet. And so I get out to Monument Valley. It's gorgeous. I just sit there and take in the scenery, and I'm like, this is amazing. And I'd camped behind some of the jewelry stands that were out there. And behind those jewelry stands, it can be pretty desolate. There was nobody else around me that night. Like, it was so empty. I would see the occasional car drive on the main road, where you could barely see my camper on the side of the hill, but you could still see that I was there from the main road. And I got out of my camper that night just to look at the beauty of like the stars with the silhouette of those beautiful Monument Valley mountains that are out there, that serene picture that you see in Forrest Gump when he's running down the road. Imagine standing there looking at a sky full of stars and that outline of those mountains. It was just incredible. And then my little camper outline too, because there was a full moon and it was hitting the camper just right. But anyway, so I'm really enjoying this moment. It was a very spiritual moment because I'm thinking about my grandma a lot. And the next morning, there's a lot of photographers out there to take pictures as the sun rises, because that's when the mountains are really red and they're just spectacular to look at. And the photographers cleared out. It was like around 11 o'clock. I'm sitting there looking at my beautiful dog. And I'm like, when she gets up, I'll go ahead and load her in the car, and then we'll head on to my grandfather's house. So anyway, we're sitting out there enjoying the morning. And I just didn't want to disrupt the dog until she was ready to get up. Her name was Kita. She was an amazing, amazing dog. But I just didn't want to disrupt her. I wanted her to get up when she was ready. And so I just sat there just enjoying the mountains in my little camp chair. All I had to do was put up my camp chair. Everything else was packed up, and load her little blanket in the car once she stood up and load her in there. And so she stood up. It was around 11 o'clock in the early morning. She stood up, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll load her up. I get her in the back of the car. As I'm closing the hatch to the car, here comes this truck barreling down to me. All the photographers had cleared out. There was nobody there except for me and this truck that now pulled up. And it pulled up on my passenger side, and I was on my driver's side. I had just hopped over the hitch as I closed the back hatch of the car down. And this truck comes pulling up next to me, and this guy gets out of the car with a face mask on. And he was like, yeah, I need gas money. And I was like, sorry, I don't carry cash when I travel. And he was like, oh. And he looked at me and he goes, and there was somebody in the passenger seat as well. So that was kind of creepy. But he looks at me and he goes, oh. He goes, you don't have a man? And I was like, no, I've got my dog, and I'm on my driver's side. He's still on the passenger side. There's a hitch and a camper in between us as well. And I'm just like, oh man, this is scary. In my mind, I'm thinking, what would have happened if I was not packed up, But anyway, so he's like, oh, and he just looked at me funny and made me feel very uncomfortable and very awkward. I just remember looking at him like, I'm sorry. I was like, I wish I had some money to give you. I hope you have a good day. Good luck. And I like get in my car and I close the door, and I'm like just sitting there praying, and I'm holding the steering wheel about to start the car. And I'm like, please go, please go, please go. And right about that time, he finally started his truck and drove off in front of me down the road that I was on. And it gave me space to turn around and get the hell out of there, because I was like, this is not comfortable at all. Especially the fact that he called out the fact that I was a single female by myself. Like, that was like, no, thank you. I don't want whatever you're serving. So I was leaving that situation, driving down the road, going back to the Four Corners to get to Albuquerque. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I think you just averted something really, really, really bad. I think, like, had I not been packed up, I had the impression, had all my stuff been yard sailed out there, that something really bad could have happened. So I'm really grateful for the timing, the gut. I feel like it was my grandmother protecting me after the spiritual night that I had out there, and just felt so close to her. And it was just such a crazy situation. I'm like, I don't want to end up in this spot ever again. That was my crazy story from 2020, getting abducted by a cult member, and then Monument Valley. So in 2022, I went and got my carrying permit before I took my 2023 trip, just because of circumstances. And after being in a few situations, I was like, I can't not travel without any type of protection, especially for late at night. Even though a lot of these instances occur during the day, I just want to make sure that I'm always prepared for any given scenario that could occur out there. So fast forwarding to 2023, because I worked through 2021 and most of 2022 to try and accumulate enough money to take my dream trip, which is what I did in 2023. So in 2023, this was just a small little thing that happened, but it was enough to, like, you know, like when you stub your toe, how all the blood rushes to your head, that feeling that you get like when you don't hurt yourself, but something bad happens and you're like, oh no. I was in Birch Bay, right above Seattle, after having this gorgeous trip across the country. The momentum was amazing for me. Like, this is stuff that people write about, you know, and so I'm in the process of trying to write it all down before I forget about it. In 2023, I'm in Birch Bay, and I get back from running some errands, I think, and going to pick up some food. And I open up the camper door, and then all of a sudden the camper just drops and it goes bam. And I'm like, shit, what was that? I run around to the front of my camper. My little wheel that, you know, holds the camper up wasn't pinned in place correctly. So the whole camper just dropped onto the hitch. And I'm like, oh my God. This is a problem. Yep, this just happened. So we're going to see how we can fix it. I've got some people coming to help. Whoops. I don't know how that happened. I thought I had everything locked in place perfectly. After traveling in it for almost 2 years cumulatively, that's the first time that ever happened. And I was like, I cannot believe I didn't put the pin in place correctly. So I like panic and I'm like, what do I do? Oh my God, I can't believe I did this. And I'm like, I try to pick it up myself, and it's still 1,200 pounds, you know, like, I mean, that's saying, like, even with the pivoting, you know, of the wheels kind of sort of being towards the center a little bit, you know, it's still probably about a good 500 to 700 pounds of weight that I've got to maneuver by myself, which is just too much for me. And I enlisted some of my camp neighbors. Thank God I was at a campground and I wasn't out in the middle of nowhere by myself. But I enlisted some of my camp neighbors. They had some young boys that were like in their, you know, teens, late teens, and they came over and they just picked it right up. And I was like, thank you so much. Like, I didn't know what I was going to do. But see, here's the damsel in distress. People come to help. And I really appreciate that, especially being a single female traveler. Like, there are just some things where we have to enlist help. And it's work smarter, not harder, you know, when it comes to females, because we have to think a little differently than men, because we can't muscle our way out of some of the situations that we find ourselves in. I'm really appreciative of the generosity of others, especially when I find myself in these situations, and the willingness to always help. So thank you to those guys too that helped me in that situation. If you ever watch this, which I doubt, but you just never know. Last situation that I wanted to share with you was, oh gosh, like, when I think about some of this stuff, it gives me anxiety. But when I was in Roswell, I had pulled up to this campsite. I usually leave like early to mid-afternoon. I give myself plenty of time to get somewhere, to scope it out, to see, to make sure I feel comfortable there, and then have a plan B, C, D, and E, usually, just in case I don't feel comfortable at the campsite that I've selected. And so I get there, it's dusky because we're on the shorter time frame in the winter, and I haven't done that much winter traveling. You know, usually I'm home for the holidays, and I decided to take a little hiatus from my parents at the end of 2023 and go out for 3 or 4 weeks before Christmas, in between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so that I wasn't sitting in their garage. And so I went down to Roswell from Albuquerque, and I left too late in the day, the short winter hours. I got there just past dark, so I couldn't really see where I was going. Parked the camper in the first space that I could find that was off the road. that wasn't taken by another camper that was, about a half a mile down the road the other way. And so I was like, oh, well, here's a spot. I'll stay here tonight and then I'll scope it out and I'll go move if I need to. So I get in like right after it gets completely dark. I set up the camper as quickly as possible. I don't like being outside in the dark. I usually have the camper locked up. I'm usually a little bit more prepared than I was for this situation. And 2 hours after I get there, this truck pulls up and he gets out of the truck and he's shining a light and he shines it over at the camper, like maybe just once or twice. So he knew I was there. But I didn't think he was like, I was like, this is weird. He's like way too close for all of this space out here. And so he's shining a light, on the ground. And I'm like, maybe he lost something earlier. Like, this is really strange. And it's my first time to Roswell, which everybody knows, like, aliens are associated with Roswell. So about maybe 5 minutes after he'd been there, and my heart's kind of racing, and I turned off all the lights in my camper so that I could creep on him and make sure that he wasn't coming over to me, in any way, and that I would be prepared if he did, come over to my camper for any reason. But as I was watching him, I just remember like him all of a sudden peeling out from where he was. He comes running back over the hill that he had gone over with the flashlight, and he's running for his car like full speed. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And what is he running from? Should I be running too? Like, this is kind of creepy, like, this is the scariest thing I've probably ever had to deal with out here. And he gets in his truck and he peels out of there, and I'm just sitting there laying in bed like, what do I do? Like, do I sit here or do I like actually try to get out of this situation myself? So anyway, that was that moment, and it was not fun. But I just remember laying in bed like freaking out. Okay, this is it. This is how it ends. I'm going to get abducted by aliens tonight. He went peeling out of there for no reason. But it was just an odd circumstance. Anyway, that's when I was carrying. So I did feel a little bit more secure. But if I'm up against aliens, I ain't got no defense. So whatever. Maybe I got abducted by aliens. Maybe that's why I'm such an odd bird. I don't know. But anyway, doesn't really matter. Having a good time. All right, guys, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. I really hoped you enjoyed these road life stories. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly of what can happen, and out of every bad situation, I always learned something. I always came out better for it. And I'm grateful to all of the circumstances, no matter how crazy that they were, that I had that experience. I would like to reduce the ones that were definitely human interaction, because those by far are the scariest interactions. Those are, you can't predict what other people are going to do. And those type of things happen very rarely out on the road, but they still can happen. And you always need to be prepared. And always, 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 I cannot stress this enough, listen to your gut. Had I listened to my gut with the cult situation, I would have known right away that this was not the right situation for me to be in. And yeah, that's the best advice I can give you, is if you find yourself in a terrifying situation, always listen to your gut. Don't try to slough it off as, oh, I was probably just in a moment or whatever. No, that was your self-defense. That was your body telling you this is not the right situation for you to be in. Amazing things that can happen if you just listen. So always, always pay attention to how you feel about a situation, because that's either God or your intuition telling you that something is wrong. I really hope to see y'all down the road. And don't you forget to dream, live, and wonder in the meantime. I will see y'all next week.